A few years ago, I went for an exchange semester in Shanghai. And while I was there, I heard for the first time the Shanghai dialect, also called Shanghainese. While it was widely spoken in the city until about the 90s or so, as of today, you won't hear it spoken very often around the city. In fact, nowadays, fluency is a lot more common among older generations in Shanghai than among younger ones. This decline raises delicate questions about state policies and dialect preservation. Dialects are regional variations of a language. They have their own vocabulary and their own pronunciation. Here in Switzerland, for example, we have 4 official languages. Each is protected and promoted throughout the country. But for dialects, which we also have many of, their survival mainly relies on community engagement and cultural pride. In order to better understand what happened to Shanghainese in the last decades, we have to go back a few decades earlier. Since Mandarin was designated as China's national language in the 50s, more local policies were introduced to strengthen its presence across the administration and the education. By the 90s, Mandarin was essential everywhere, and the use of local dialects like Shanghainese strongly declined. Shanghainese was eventually prohibited across schools in the 90s. Ding Dimong, a linguist from Shanghai, explained to me how the changes took place in schools. She told me that, for example, from 1996 on, school teachers were required to pass a Mandarin certificate before they were allowed to teach, and Mandarin would officially replace the dialect in the classrooms. At this time, Ding quickly noticed the rapid decline of her city dialect. And in response, in 2002, she decided to open a Shanghainese course at Shanghai University. It was a way for her to allow curious locals and university students to keep on practicing and transmitting the dialect. As a Shanghai local, she sees teaching the dialect as a form of personal duty. Ding also told me more about the origins of Shanghainese. The Shanghai dialect is the result of hundreds of years of migration waves, trade, and colonial history. Its roots trace back to the Wu dialect, which itself dates back to thousands of years ago. Ding told me about a few expressions that make the dialect unique to her. For example, if a Shanghai local calls you a monkey, they're not insulting you. They're actually praising how smart you are. The expression menkojing comes from the English word monkey. It's what a local would use to describe someone who's sharp and intuitive, a little bit like a monkey. Here's how it's pronounced.
Menkojing.
Audio provided by Ding. The expression ala, which means we, us, actually comes from the Ningbo dialect, a city just south from Shanghai.
Ala.
Her favorite expression actually also comes from the English. The expression dia comes from the word dear. It's what a local would use to describe a young, charming person.
Dia.
Ding also told me something that caught my attention. She told me that the majority of her students were actually new Shanghainese. The new Shanghainese are people who are originally not from Shanghai, but who moved to the city over a decade ago or so. They want to get more familiar with Shanghai culture, and they consider that one way of doing so is to learn the city's dialect. Now that you've heard the story of Ding, let me tell you how younger generations still connect with the dialect today. Hu Shiyong is 24 years old, and although she was born in Shanghai, her story with the dialect is very similar with what the new Shanghainese experienced. She was born after school policies were established, and she grew up not speaking the dialect. She told me how when she visited her grandparents, the whole family would start speaking Shanghainese, and she needed her mother to translate every conversation to her in Mandarin. A few years later, Hu moved to Beijing for her studies. And once in Beijing, she found herself with classmates who came from all over China, And that's when she realized how her Shanghainese origins made her unique. They sort of set her apart from the others. It made her more curious about her roots, and she decided to teach herself the Shanghai dialect. As a literature student, she soon started using it in her writing, mixing words and expressions in the dialect with Mandarin, so that people from all over China can understand her work. And she did pretty successfully. Her latest short story was published in Shanghai Literature, one of China's most prestigious literature magazines. What's interesting is when Hu was doing this, she told me that she was actually following the footsteps of Shanghai-born author Jin Yuchong, who also used this blend of Shanghainese and Mandarin when writing his novel Blossoms. Blossoms was a huge success when it came out in China in 2013, partly due to its unique writing style. It was awarded numerous literary prizes and eventually caught the attention of filmmaker Wong Kar-wai, who adapted it just last year into a high-budget TV series. The series, Blossoms, is a big success, and it's now broadcasted in both Mandarin and in Shanghainese. The Shanghainese version is actually now available with Mandarin subtitles, once again allowing anyone in China to get a glimpse of the city dialect, whether they speak it or not. Blossoms is set in the 60s and in the 90s in Shanghai. It follows the lives of different characters through major events of these decades, like the Cultural Revolution and the economic reforms era. So, what could explain that Shanghainese, a seemingly dying dialect, recently became a cultural sensation, featured both in TV shows and in literature? A few minutes ago, I was telling you how the survival of dialects mainly relied on cultural pride and community engagement. What we're witnessing today in Shanghai through Ding's courses, whose novels are the success of Blossoms, are key examples of this pride and engagement. Locals recognize the value of the dialect, and they work hard to keep it alive in new and different ways. I like to think that the Shanghai dialect, more than just a memory, is actually evolving and adapting to its city's changing environment, as it's been doing for centuries. The dialect will remain a living voice for Shanghai, past, present, and future. This presentation is based on an article I wrote. If you're interested in reading it, please reach out to me. Thank you.